I'd like you to think, well, I'll go ahead and tell you the title of the message is Whatever Happens, ... And I'll explain that title a little bit later. You know, we all go through serious trials in life, and a lot of you here, I know what some of your serious trials have been. And I heard an excellent sermon last Sabbath about, it was about connecting the dots, but connecting the dots backwards. We can't look ahead in our lives and connect the dots, but we can look back on our lives and the things we've gone through and often connect the dots doing that. And I can relate to that. I've never been in a severe trial that I could put my finger on and say, this is why I'm going through this. But a lot of times afterwards, sometimes years later, you can look back and see why. But I'd like you to think about severe trials that you've been through, or better yet, that you might be going through right now. Like some of you, the hardest trial I've ever gone through is losing my dear sweet wife. And it was 4 years ago last month. I so fervently wanted God to heal her, but during that period of time, my whole life was up in the air. I didn't know how it was going to turn out. And actually, my whole life is still up in the air. But that's just the way it is, and that's not unique to me. Everybody here has either lost their mate or will lose their mate, or their mate will lose you. Life is terminal. None of us gets out of this deal alive. But, and here's the big but, is the life that's coming is much better than this life. So my job, the rest of my life, is to walk with my little hand reached up in God's big warm hand. If I just stay on the trail with Him, whatever comes along, He's got it. If I trust in Him and walk with Him. And we can take that to the bank. God doesn't work on our timetable. He works on His timetable. That's one thing I've figured out in life. And it's actually a good thing that He does, because whatever God does, His timetable and His answer to our prayers is always the best if we just walk with Him. I borrowed the title of this message from a book I saw on a TV interview recently. The name of the book is Whatever Happens by Robert J. Morgan. And I ordered the book. I haven't read it yet. I've kind of breezed through it some. But it's about Philippians chapter 1, verse 27. And the quote, including the title, comes out of the NIV, New International Version. And I don't typically use the NIV, but the way this verse is worded, I thought it worked well. But, you know, Paul and Silas, they were on a missionary journey, and they were trying to follow God's will and preaching where God wanted them to preach. But every place they went, they got turned away. And I'm not sure, I think most of the journey was on foot. I think some of it was by sea, but 1,000 miles, and every time you knock on a door, you get turned away. That would be pretty frustrating. I'm originally from Indiana, and Indianapolis, I think, is a little less than 1,000 miles from here. So if I were walking from here to Indianapolis, or think of some place that you know of about 1,000 miles, and you get thwarted every time you try, then that would really begin to test your patience. But finally, when they got to Troas, Paul had a vision, and in the vision he was told to go to Macedonia. So he did. They had gone that far, which was the majority of the journey, before they ever found out what their mission was. Think about what journeys you've been on. Like I mentioned a while ago, we've all been on journeys all our life, and we don't know how it's going to turn out. But what we do know is we just have to keep our hand up in God's big warm hand and walk with him and trust him. We have to bypass the closed doors by faith until we come to the door that God's preparing to open. Let's turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 6. Ecclesiastes 11, verse 6. And their persistence reminds me of this verse. Verse 6, in the morning sow your seed, and in the evening do not withhold your hand. For if you do not know which will prosper, either this or that, or whether both alike will be good. So back to Paul and Silas, when they were in prison, they'd been beaten very badly, and they were in chains, and they were singing too. If you remember the rest of the story, that's when it's a good example for us to try to keep our joy even when we're going through severe trials. But that was the circumstance when God released the chains from them, and but they were sitting there singing. They'd been severely beaten. They didn't know if they were going to be put to death or maybe released. They just didn't know. Just like all of us at times, they didn't know what their future was. Sometimes in our lives, God's will in our life is perplexing. We don't know if we should do this or that. We know we should always seek God, but we don't always know what the answer is. Paul was badly beaten and in chains, and even then he wrote an encouraging letter to the Philippians who were praying for him. So let's turn to Philippians chapter 1, and we'll read verse 27. And I'm going to read this in the New International Version, starting in verse 7. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. And we can apply that to anything we're going through in our lives. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in the one Spirit, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel. I read an article here a few weeks ago titled "How to Live a Life Worthy of Christ's Calling" by Gregory Brown. And he said, a person worthy of his pay, we're supposed to live worthy, conduct ourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. So he says, a person worthy of his pay was one whose day's work corresponded to his day's wages. The believer who walks in a manner worthy of the calling with which he has been called is one whose daily living corresponds to his high position as a child of God. As fellow heir with Jesus Christ, his practical living matches his spiritual position. So these are pretty sobering words, and it makes me ask myself, how am I doing with that? Are my actions being worthy of my calling? Something we all need to ask ourselves. Let's turn to Philippians chapter 4. I'm sorry, it's not Philippians chapter 4. It's Philippians chapter 2. We'll read verses 1 through 4. We'll discuss some areas which we can examine ourselves in our own lives. So we'll read some admonitions that Paul gave us from the book of Philippians. Point number 1 is working together as Christians. Philippians 2, starting in verse 1. Therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, Fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. And that's a good way to get along well with other people too, is making sure we esteem others better than ourselves. Verse 4, let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. My late wife and I worked hard to cross over imaginary church organizational lines to encourage us all to love one another. Let's read John chapter 13, 34 and 35. This is a passage we often quoted. John 13, 34 and 35. Verse 34, a new commandment, this is Jesus Christ speaking to us. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, as I have loved you, that you also love one another. Then he follows it up by saying, by this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So we're supposed to love one another as Jesus Christ loved us. How did he love us? He gave his very life for us. That's pretty serious love. So we shouldn't say, well, no, I don't want to talk to this guy because he goes to X organization, or I don't want to talk to them. But that must break God's heart when he sees us trying to push other people away, other brothers and sisters in the body of Christ. But we're to love one another. I think this congregation and also CGI, where I normally attend, does a really good job at that. Second point is to live a contented life. It's much more enjoyable to go through life being content with the circumstances you find yourself in, rather than being grateful for what you have, rather than looking at what you don't have and being ungrateful. Doesn't mean we can't improve our circumstances. If we can improve our circumstances, then good, we should, if we can do that without sacrificing something else more important. Let's turn now to Philippians chapter 4, and we'll read verses 10 through 13. Philippians chapter 4, verse 10. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at last your care for me has flourished again, though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased and how to abound. Everywhere in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I'll share a story with you that I could tell you a lot of stories about me that would not be a good example. The one I'm going to share right now is maybe a good example. It happened a long time ago. When I was 15 years old, we lived in Indiana, and Dad was going to be transferred to pretty much anywhere in the country we wanted to move to, because the young guy that owned the small company that Dad worked for wanted to open a branch somewhere else in another state. So we had come down here. We'd narrowed it down to, I think, Knoxville, Tennessee, around the Fort Smith area, and then also Big Sandy. So we made a trip down here. It was Mom and Dad, my older brother Gary, and me. My oldest brother Larry was already gone from home at that time. So we came down here to Big Sandy to check it out. And on the way home, we had a 67 Ford Fairlane that Dad had bought new a couple years before that. On the way home, we were going through, I think it was Illinois, and it was just pouring down rain. And we had a flat tire. So Dad pulled into a park, I think it was. We're sitting there with the flat tire. And for some reason, I'm the youngest, and Dad picks me to get out in the pouring rain and change the flat tire. And I'm sitting there thinking, why don't you have Gary change it? He's older than I am. But, so I thought about it, and I thought, okay, I've got two choices. I can either do this and be happy. I am going to do it. I'm going to have to do it. That's a given, because I'm not going to argue with Dad. That wouldn't turn out well. So I could either get out in the pouring rain, jack the car up with everybody else in it, take the tire and change it, and be happy about it, or I could be upset about it. I chose joy. I decided to do it and be happy about it. And I still remember that experience fondly, all these, 56 years later. And it was a good lesson for me. So when we're going through a circumstance that we're not happy about it, let's just decide to choose joy. If we choose to be mad, it's not going to help any. It's only going to make things worse. If you choose joy, it'll make it better. My third point is trust God in every single need. Now let's read Philippians 4, verse 6, and also 19 through 20. Starting in verse 6, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, and that's important, with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God. If you have children, you're likely a lot more responsive when they come and say, well, Mom and Dad, I really appreciate that you did this or that, instead of just coming saying, I want this. So having thanksgiving is important. In verse 19, and my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Jesus Christ. Now to our God and Father be glory forever and ever. Amen. And now let's turn to Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8, verse 28. For we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. And then I'll just read 1 John 5:3. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. Let's turn now to Psalms chapter 23, and we'll read the whole chapter, verses 1 through 6. I love this chapter, and I know this is often on a program at a funeral. And also I put it on the program to my wife's funeral, and I have it inscribed on the top of our headstone. But for 6 short verses, there's a lot in this passage. I don't know if I've given it here or not, but I've given a message on Psalm chapter, the 23rd Psalm, and it's really rich. I've actually got a book on it that's very thorough. It was written by a man that grew up in, I think it was South Africa. He grew up as a sheep herder, and he's grown now. He's a church pastor, I think, and he still herds sheep. But he has a lot of insight into it. But we'll read this chapter, starting in verse 1, 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. And when it says he leads me beside still waters, I didn't realize this, but in the book it said that sheep don't like rushing water. They want the calm water to drink out of. Verse 3, he restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And I can't read this verse without thinking about God doing that for me. Just makes me laugh every time I think about it. And God did that for me in a big way back here. It doesn't seem like it, but it's been 25 years ago. Surely goodness and mercy, no, I'll back up a little bit. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In closing, we all deal with things that we don't want to have to deal with. So what's been weighing you down recently? Regardless, Paul's advice is rock solid. Whatever happens, be resolved to navigate through it in a godly way. It's actually pretty simple. It's like I said earlier, if we just follow God's lead and walk with our little hand up in his hand, whatever comes along, he's got it. Just like Paul, we have to go through trials. We have to suffer. The answer may not be the answer that we want, and it may not be on our timetable. But that's a good thing, because God is God and we're not. God knows the end from the beginning. We don't. Whatever God does is done perfectly, and it's done at the perfect time. God's outcome is a perfect outcome, and his timetable is a perfect timetable. So let's all walk with God and trust him totally. He will never let you down, it's guaranteed. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ.